Matthew Hull, Managing Director at Morgan Motors. Best of luck to you. Well, just before we go, a quick recap on where we are with the markets right now. The Dow is down 1,300 points across the board, more than 3% losses on US stock markets. That is it from us. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Thanks for watching.
Live from London, this is BBC News. A new world order as Donald Trump announces sweeping new tariffs on all imports into the US. We have correspondents in Washington, Delhi, London and Paris as we assess the fallout from the president's dramatic announcement. Well, on today's programme we'll have reaction, we'll look at the retaliation being planned and gauge the impact on markets, jobs and prices. Our other main headlines. Hamas rejects the latest Israeli ceasefire proposal, preferring instead a plan put forward by Egypt and Qatar. And with MPs still considering whether to legalise assisted dying in England and Wales, we have a special report looking at how the law works in California. Hello and welcome to BBC News. Let's start with those extraordinary events at the White House, with Donald Trump introducing sweeping new tariffs on all imports into the United States. President Trump claimed that America had been ripped off by foreigners for decades. Governments and businesses around the world are now taking stock. Retaliation is already being planned in many capitals. The fallout there after that dramatic announcement from Donald Trump at the White House yesterday evening. Do stay with us, plenty more reaction. Here in a few minutes' time, we'll talk to Ben Chu from BBC Verify, taking a look at how Donald Trump actually got the various percentage figures for all these different countries. We'll also hear from the car sector here in the UK. They, of course, already have been hit by a 25% tariff. So all of that are coming up in the next few minutes. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. You're watching BBC News. Let's turn to the Middle East now, because Hamas has rejected the latest Israeli proposal for the release of hostages and a ceasefire. Instead, the group is reaffirming its commitment to an alternative put forward by Egypt and Qatar. We're about to take a short break. When we're back, we'll have much more on the tariff story, international reaction. Emmanuel Macron currently meeting with business leaders in Paris, and Ben Chu from BBC Verify will be actually going through that list of the tariffs for individual countries. That's here in just a moment.
And news arrives in an instant.
We hear from media insiders on their perspective on the world.
And uncover the stories behind the latest trends. Join us for the media show. Watch.
Morning. Come and have a seat. Now, of course, I'm not going to go easy on you. There are some really big questions we've got to try and get answers to this morning. But I'll be fair, and we just want to hear what you've got to say. So, shall we get on with it?
And we're rolling.
Here we go. Join me to hear from the biggest names inside and outside politics.
Sunday with Laura Koonsberg. Sundays at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
The art of good conversation is to say the right thing at the right time and in the right way. You have to be original, sympathetic,
Welcome back. And for those watching closely, I think you've been back for a while, but apologies for that. Some technical problems here in the studio, but you're watching BBC News. So at 3:30, let's turn to our main headlines here. A new world order as Donald Trump announces sweeping tariffs on all imports into the US. Despite the smiling faces, the global stock markets take a dive. The Dow Jones is currently down by more than 3%. We'll get an assessment from my colleagues at BBC Verify. They've been looking at who'll be paying what and why.
Welcome to Wallace Island. No!
As I say, a few technical problems we're having. We are going to go to Jane Dougal, who's got all the sports details, which gives us about 3 minutes to fix the gremlins. Jane, over to you.
I can take as long as you like, Matthew. We're going to start with the FA because they have confirmed that the UK is the only bidder for the 2035 Women's World Cup. More on all of those stories on the BBC Sport website. That's it for now. Matthew, back to you.
Jane, thanks so much. As promised, let's return straight away to our top story, tariffs, with US stock markets opening a little while ago, falling sharply on that opening following President Trump's announcement of those sweeping new tariffs on all imports into the US. So with me here in the studio is BBC Verify's Ben Chu. And Ben, we've been looking at the list and it's there between us on that screen. I suppose the obvious question here is, how has Donald Trump come up with those variety of percentage figures on tariffs? Well, we have to leave it there, but thanks very much. Very, very useful to actually get that view on the ground at one of those car plants. Thanks so much for joining us on the programme. We're going to take a short break, but before we do, worth just referencing what you have been seeing on the screen, which is the New York Stock Exchange, because it has been falling since that announcement that was made at the White House, and it is still, the arrow's still pointing red and downwards, 3% down today. It was fascinating watching what was happening, the tumbling futures markets in real time yesterday. An American business presenter saying he'd never seen anything like it when he was watching Donald Trump speak and the markets respond in the way they did. So we'll keep an eye on that and bring you more in the next few minutes. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. You're watching BBC News. Now, in November, MPs voted in principle to legalise assisted dying in England and Wales, but an amended bill will go to the Commons later this month. The proposed law is partly based on one that already exists in California. News that they are set to double the size of a new factory currently under construction in Texas as a result of what we've seen. A quick look on the markets too. The rout deepens on the Nasdaq. That's 5% down. The S&P 4% down. More headlines here in just a moment or two. Live from London, this is BBC News. A new world order as Donald Trump announces sweeping tariffs on all imports into the United States. The global stock markets are giving their reaction. The Dow Jones is currently down more than 3.6%. On today's programme, we'll have more reaction. We'll look at the retaliation that's being planned and gauge the impact on the markets, on jobs and also prices. Our other main headlines: Hamas rejects the latest Israeli ceasefire proposal, preferring instead a plan put forward by Egypt and Qatar. And with MPs still considering whether to legalise assisted dying in England and Wales, we have a special report looking at how the law works in California. Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live. Let's start with those extraordinary events at the White House, with Donald Trump introducing sweeping new tariffs on all imports into the United States. President Trump claimed America had been ripped off by foreigners for decades. Well, the US stock markets have dropped sharply in early trading in the last couple of hours, following those falls in markets in Europe and Asia. Jordan Cummings, we have to leave it there. Thank you for being with us here on the programme. Next up on the show, I'll talk to Ben Thompson. We've seen the markets having a real pounding through the course of the day. So we'll talk to Ben here in a moment or two. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. Let's continue the conversation around the tariff announcement, the fallout, and there on the screen you can see the fallout from the markets, all the indicators showing red. Ben Thompson is here in the studio with me. Ben, I know you have your business bulletin coming up in about 15 minutes and he will entirely focus on this, but in terms of what is happening on the markets, just give us perspective, because as Donald Trump was speaking last night, you saw everything plummeting downwards, and it has continued today.
We could see the political fallout come rather sooner than he might hope.
Yes, and they're openly talking about prices rising. They keep saying short term, but we will see how short term short actually is. Ben, thanks very much. You're back in a moment or two to give us more on all of that. I'll be back in about 15 minutes with more on all of our main stories. That, of course, but the latest in Gaza and our other headline stories. So all of that is coming up in the next few minutes. The situation is incredibly fluid. Do stay with us here on BBC News. We will keep you right up to date. Don't go away.
America First President Trump unveils his new global tariffs, with no country left unspared, as he vows to reshape global trade.
Hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country.
But the US dollar tumbles as President Trump's tariffs spark a global stock market sell-off. And as auto tariffs come into effect, we'll hear from the boss of one of Britain's iconic motor brands. So welcome along. This is Business Today. I'm Ben Thompson, and we begin with news from the US. Of course, the Dow Jones Industrial Average currently down more than 3% as the world wakes up to a new global trade order after President Trump unveiled some rather sweeping tariffs yesterday. Now, among the moves that Mr. Trump announced were a 10% baseline tariff on all global imports, which will go into effect on Saturday. George, really good to talk to you. Thank you for being with us. That's George Saravelos, Global Head of FX Research at Deutsche Bank. So what you're looking at there, Mark Carney, of course, the Canadian Prime Minister, still speaking. We took a little of that press conference earlier, as we said, describing the tariffs imposed by President Trump as unjustified, unwarranted and misguided. Let's just have a listen into a little more of what Mark Carney has to say.
Well, I know we keep slipping in between English and French, but we're staying with it because within the little bursts of what he is saying in English, it is significant, some of the things he is saying, and we still wait to get to the questions, and I think that will be very interesting as well. But that was such a fascinating phrase in the last few moments. If the US is no longer able to lead, Canada will. So absolutely laying it out very clearly. And of course, Mark Carney is heading into his own elections, and it was not that long ago that his party was really flailing in the polls, and suddenly with what they are confronting with Donald Trump and tariffs, he has absolutely, his party has boosted in the polls. So we are watching Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, just go through some of the reaction. And as I say, we will stay with this news conference because in a little while we'll get to some of the questions, and that will be interesting in terms of immediate responses, long-term responses, and whether in a sense, Canada will lead the rest of the world in terms of their retaliation, their response to what has come out of the White House. So all of those things we wait and watch to hear and some of the answers. You're watching BBC News.
In this new world, we have to look out for ourselves, and because we are Canadian, we will always look out for each other. La semaine dernière, j'ai annoncé plusieurs mesures ciblées pour soutenir les travailleurs et les entreprises directement touchées par la guerre commerciale de President Trump.
Well, I think at this point we're going to come away from that news conference. We'll continue to watch it. This has only started, 10-15 minutes ago. So when it gets to questions, we will return for some of the key exchanges. But he continues with his basic statement in French and English. So we'll come away for the next couple of minutes. Well, it gives us a chance to turn to a fascinating story because a study has found the strongest evidence yet that a shingles vaccine could cut the risk of dementia. Researchers from Stanford University's School of Medicine in the US analysed the health records of nearly 300,000 older adults in Wales and found that those who received the jab were 20% less likely to develop dementia within 7 years. Well, Dr. Pascal Gelselsver was the senior lead author of that study. And he joins me now, and I hope that the visuals last with us. But Doctor, tell me a little more then about what you discovered here by going through the data. Doctor, it's absolutely fascinating. I'm glad that we were able to squeeze in the interview. I was looking forward to it, and it just fell nicely that Mark Carney had finished that sequence of his statement. So thank you for joining us here on the programme. We'll return to Canada, hear more from Canada's Prime Minister. We'll also get the latest from the White House. Katrina Perry is still there. So all of that is coming up here in the next 60 minutes after weather, and that's with Louise Lear. News. A new world order as Donald Trump announces sweeping tariffs on all imports into the US.
China, first row.
The global stock markets are giving their reaction. The Dow Jones is currently down more than 3%.
7%.
Advantages of the president's tariffs plan.
On today's programme, we'll speak to a representative of the UK car manufacturers and get reaction from the EU, India and China. Our other main headlines here. Hamas rejects the latest Israeli ceasefire proposal, preferring instead a plan put forward by Egypt and Qatar. And with MPs still considering whether to legalise assisted dying in England and Wales, we have a special report looking at how the law works in California. Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live. We start with those extraordinary events at the White House with Donald Trump introducing sweeping new tariffs on all imports into the United States. President Trump claimed America had been ripped off by foreigners for decades. Well, the US stock markets have dropped sharply in early trading following falls in markets in Europe and in Asia. Well, that just gives you some of the flavour of the international reaction there's been. In a moment or two, we'll hear from Ben Chu from BBC Verify, who's been going through the numbers, actually trying to work out how Donald Trump worked out the percentage tariffs for each individual country. So that is coming up here in just a moment or two. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. You're watching BBC News now. As promised, let's return to tariffs. We were looking a little earlier at that long list that Donald Trump produced yesterday. The UK, of course, being hit with 10% tariffs. That is the baseline. Many of the other big trading partners of the US hit with much bigger tariffs on the 9th of April. But how did Donald Trump come up with each particular figure for each particular country? Well, Ben Chu from BBC Verify has been taking a look. Dan Johnson, live there in Jerusalem. Thanks very much. In terms of those ceasefire discussions, there continues to be an impasse. That was down with the latest. Do stay with us here on BBC News. We'll have plenty more on our main story, the tariffs, much more reaction coming up here on the programme in the next moment or two. Thanks for watching. See you in a bit. Welcome back to BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines here. A new world order as Donald Trump announces sweeping new tariffs on all imports into the United States. Well, the global stock markets are deep in the red, including the FTSE 100. Britain's Prime Minister calls for calm, but he says nothing is off the table.
This is not just a short-term tactical exercise. It is the beginning of a new era. And we need to understand that.
One other headline, with MPs still considering whether to legalise assisted dying in England and Wales. We have a special report looking at how the law works in California. Well, all of that is coming up in a moment or two. First, all the sport of the day. Will Perry is here, and well, good evening.
Matthew, good evening to you. Good to see you. The final midweek Premier League game sees Chelsea take on Tottenham in a London derby later. Enzo Maresca's side are looking to move. Matthew, that is all the sport for now. More from us later. We'll see you then.
Well, thanks very much. See you then. Let's return straight away to our main story. US stock markets have been falling sharply following President Trump's announcement of sweeping new tariffs on imports. The US president claimed America had been ripped off by foreigners for decades. Well, here in the UK, the political leaders have been reacting to what we heard out of the White House. Speaking in Derbyshire, the Prime Minister said people should be under no illusion that the new US tariffs represented a fundamental shift in global economics. Well, a really positive story to end on. Time's up for me. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully I'll see you at the same time tomorrow. Bye for now.
Hello there. A serene swan swimming behind me.